In the quiet, unassuming town of Barron, Wisconsin, life usually moved at a steady pace. It was the kind of place where people waved at each other on the street, where doors were often left unlocked, and where crime was almost unheard of. But that peaceful facade shattered one fateful October night, leaving the small community rattled, gripped by fear, and haunted by questions no one could answer. It was the dead of night, and a heavy stillness hung over the town, blanketing the rural roads and modest homes in an eerie silence. That calm was pierced by a frantic emergency call from the Kloss family home, a call so brief, so filled with terror, that it sent a chill down the spine of even the most seasoned dispatchers. Police would later say they'd never heard anything quite like it. Silence, muffled voices, and a single, heart stopping sound in the background. As officers raced toward the Kloss residence, they had no way of knowing the horror they were about to encounter or the tragedy that would set off one of the most mystifying cases in Wisconsin's history. When they arrived, they found the scene inside the Kloss home was nothing short of a nightmare. The front door was broken down, a violent entry that shattered the peace of this quiet Wisconsin neighborhood. Officers found themselves walking into a horror they couldn't have imagined, a brutal, merciless attack that had left James and Denise Kloss dead. James' father, James, was discovered near the entrance, a sign that he had tried to protect his family, but the intruder had struck with ruthless efficiency. Further inside, Denise's body was found in a back room, evidence showing that she had fought until the very end. But there was something even more chilling than the scene of devastation. Jane, the family's only child, was nowhere to be found. This was no random act. Whoever had entered the Kloss home that night hadn't just taken lives. They'd taken Jane with them, leaving behind a haunting mystery and a trail of questions that seemed impossible to answer. As investigators combed through the wreckage of that shattered home, they were struck by how senseless the crime appeared. No motive, no clear reason, just devastation. And with Jane missing, an entire town was left to wonder, where had she gone? And perhaps most frightening of all, who had taken her? As dawn broke over Barron, the grim reality of the situation settled in. The Kloss family's only child, Jane, was gone. Not a trace of her remained in the house, and it was clear she hadn't simply fled. Every inch of the crime scene pointed to a single, heart-wrenching conclusion. Jane had been taken. This wasn't a runaway or a case of a teenager slipping away into the night. Someone had violently broken into the Kloss home with one goal in mind: Jane. The thought sent waves of panic through the close-knit community. In a place where trust was woven into daily life, the news of her kidnapping hit like a thunderclap. The shock quickly turned to fear, and that fear rippled outward as neighbors and friends began to question the safety of their own families. Who could have done something so unspeakable? And more hauntingly, was it someone among them? The search for James was swift and relentless. Neighbors, volunteers, and officers spread out across fields, forests, and backroads, desperate to find any clue that might lead them to her. But with every passing hour, the town felt the weight of the silence. A young girl was missing, and her captor was out there somewhere. The search for James Kloss became a desperate mission that united the entire town of Barron. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers who had never met Jane before joined together, scouring fields, combing through forests, and wading through rivers, hoping to find a clue that might lead to her safe return. People took leave from their jobs, children helped distribute flyers, and local businesses donated supplies. Barron transformed into a town with a single purpose: bringing Jane home. But as days turned into weeks, The initial spark of hope began to fade. Despite exhaustive efforts, not a single trace of James had been found. The fear in the town grew with each passing day, creeping into every home, every conversation. Parents held their children a little tighter, and people who had once felt safe in their small town haven now found themselves locking doors and glancing over their shoulders. Helplessness began to settle over the community, an invisible weight pressing down on everyone involved. The worry that James might be lost forever was a fear too terrible to fully accept, yet it loomed, casting a shadow over every heart in Baron. The question that haunted everyone was always the same: where could she be, and how much time was left to bring her back? As investigators combed through the Kloss family home, they were met with a perplexing puzzle. There were signs of a forced entry, evidence of someone breaking down the front door with brutal force. But beyond that, the scene was oddly barren. No clear fingerprints, no weapon left behind, and nothing that pointed directly to the intruder's identity. It was as if whoever had entered the Kloss home had done so with a chilling precision, leaving no trace beyond the devastation. One discovery, however, stood out: the phone used for the emergency call. It lay discarded on the floor, offering only a brief, haunting fragment of that night, a recording of muffled voices, the unmistakable sound of fear. Yet, it gave investigators no concrete leads to follow, only deepening the mystery surrounding James' disappearance. With every piece of evidence examined and every theory proposed, more questions arose. Who would commit such a crime in this quiet town, and why target this family? The lack of clear clues hinted at an unsettling truth. Whoever had taken James had likely planned every detail, leaving nothing to chance. The silence at the crime scene seemed to mock the investigators, a reminder of how little they knew and how far they were from answers. As each day passed, the gaps in the evidence grew more unsettling, leaving everyone to wonder: was there anything left behind that they were simply not seeing? Or was the captor truly one step ahead, hiding in plain sight while an entire town remained on edge? As the days dragged on without answers, Baron became a cauldron of speculation. Theories floated through whispered conversations in grocery store aisles, murmured over coffee, and discussed late into the night in living rooms and around kitchen tables. People in the community grasped for answers to the unthinkable question: why would anyone target the Kloss family? One theory took root, that this had been a targeted attack. Some wondered if James Kloss, James' father, had crossed paths with someone dangerous at work. He was a quiet, hard-working man, but perhaps he had made an enemy in some unseen way. This idea painted a picture of a ruthless figure, someone patient enough to wait for the right moment to strike. Others speculated that someone held a personal vendetta against the Kloss family. Could there have been an old grudge, a family dispute that simmered beneath the surface? Friends of Denise, James' mother, found it impossible to believe. She was known for her kindness, her gentle nature, qualities that made it difficult to imagine anyone holding resentment against her. But in the absence of facts, people began to question what they thought they knew. Then there was the most sinister theory of all, one that people dared only whisper: the possibility that Jane herself had been the true target. But why? What would make someone go to such lengths to take a 13-year-old girl? The unsettling nature of this possibility hung heavily over the town, casting suspicion on strangers and neighbors alike. As the investigation stalled and questions went unanswered, Barron found itself caught between fear and suspicion, with the mystery of James' disappearance deepening. Each theory only added to the chilling sense that something unimaginable had happened in their midst, and the truth, whatever it was, would be darker than anyone could have guessed. The police threw every resource they had into the search for James, determined to unravel the mystery that had devastated this quiet town. Officers worked tirelessly, following up on tips, questioning potential witnesses, and examining every shred of evidence from the Kloss home. They turned over every stone, combed through surveillance footage from nearby highways, and chased down any lead that might bring them closer to finding James. But the investigation seemed plagued by roadblocks at every turn. Promising tips fizzled into nothing, and the few witnesses who thought they'd seen something that night could offer only fragments of information, none leading anywhere solid. A tip about a suspicious vehicle seen in the area briefly reignited hope, yet that lead quickly dissolved, revealing only another dead end. Red herrings began to pile up, adding layers of confusion and frustration. Investigators encountered a series of calls and messages from people across the country claiming to have seen James, each sighting offering a glimmer of hope that was quickly extinguished when nothing panned out. For every promising lead, there was another misstep, another disappointment that left the team questioning if they'd ever find the path to the truth. With each passing day, the frustration in the police force grew. Detectives who had once been filled with the energy and hope of a new investigation now felt the weight of exhaustion and failure. And behind every setback, the gnawing fear deepened that someone had taken James so carefully, so ruthlessly, that she might remain out of reach. The walls seemed to close in around them, and a question began to loom. Was this case destined to go cold? In Barron, the community watched the police struggle and stumble, each roadblock casting a deeper shadow over the hope that James would be found alive. As the investigation stalled, the disappearance of James Kloss broke beyond the boundaries of Barron and swept across the nation. The FBI stepped in, adding their expertise and resources, and soon Jane's face was plastered on news broadcasts and websites from coast to coast. Her story, one of innocence torn from a quiet life and thrust into unimaginable horror, captured the hearts of Americans, who began to follow the case with bated breath. The media descended on Barron, turning this small town into the epicenter of a tragic mystery. Reporters crowded the streets, news vans lined up outside the police station, and press conferences were held daily, each one filled with reporters hoping for a breakthrough. The intensity of the national spotlight added a new layer of pressure to the investigation, with every misstep, every delay, and every unanswered question now scrutinized under a microscope. For the people of Barron, the attention was both comforting and overwhelming. It brought an outpouring of support from strangers who sent messages of hope and encouragement, praying for James' safe return. Yet it also brought a relentless surge of speculation, wild theories, and media frenzies that seemed to grow by the hour, pushing the pain of James' disappearance into a painful public ordeal. Despite the added resources, the days ticked by with no significant developments. Across the country, people watched, waited, and worried. The national attention was a double-edged sword. It spread James' story to millions, rallying support in hopes of bringing her home. Yet it also served as a stark reminder of how far the case was from being solved. The tension continued to build, with everyone asking the same question. In a world watching so closely, how could Jane Kloss still be missing? As days turned into weeks, a haunting question lingered in the minds of everyone following the case. Who could be capable of such a monstrous act? The thought that someone had not only invaded the Kloss home, but had brutally taken two lives and vanished with James seemed unfathomable. And yet, somewhere out there, James' captor remained hidden, lurking in the shadows, undetected. Speculation turned to what kind of person would commit a crime so meticulously planned, so devoid of any clear motive or traceable connection to the family. Was this someone from Barron, someone who knew the Kloss family well, or was it a stranger, an outsider who had been silently watching, biding their time? Whoever it was, they had managed to slip away without a trace, suggesting a calculated mind, a person who knew exactly what they were doing. There was something chilling in the very idea of such a figure, a person who had somehow managed to leave behind no clues, no obvious trail, as if they had vanished into thin air with Jane. It was the kind of scenario that haunted people's imaginations. The image of a captor who blended seamlessly into society, a face in the crowd, concealing dark intentions beneath a mask of normalcy. The thought lingered like a dark cloud over Barron, a town that once felt safe, but now looked over its shoulder at every turn. People grew suspicious of strangers, wary even of familiar faces, as they imagined the monster who had taken James waiting hidden somewhere out of sight. And as the search continued, one question loomed larger than ever. Who was holding James Kloss, and how much longer could they remain in the shadows? For James Kloss, life as she knew it had been stolen in a single night. Taken from her home, separated from everything she loved, she was now trapped in a terrifying, isolated world under the watch of someone she neither knew nor understood. In those early days of captivity, fear would have been her constant companion, fear of the unknown, of her captor's next move, and of the inescapable darkness surrounding her. She was held in a place stripped of comfort, where the familiar sights, sounds, and safety of home were distant memories. Every hour must have felt like a lifetime as she waited, hoping for any sign of freedom. There, alone in her thoughts, Jane faced a silent battle against despair, refusing to let it overwhelm her. Her isolation was profound, without anyone to reassure her, to tell her she would be okay. She had to find strength within herself to survive. But beneath the terror, a spark of determination flickered. Even as she endured the crushing weight of captivity, Jane clung to hope. She learned to adapt, to quiet her fear, and to wait for any opportunity, however slim, that might allow her to escape. In the face of unimaginable horror, she found a resilience that kept her spirit alive. Days turned into weeks, and though her world had grown so small, her will to survive was fierce and unwavering. Her captor may have taken her freedom, but Jane refused to let them take her courage, and as time passed, she held tight to the belief that she would one day make it back home, no matter what it took. The quiet strength she summoned in those dark, endless days would become the force that ultimately saved her. For Jane Kloss, survival was as much a mental battle as it was a physical one. Alone and far from anything familiar, she found herself plunged into a world where fear and uncertainty dominated every waking moment. But Jane was no ordinary child. Her resilience was fierce, her will unbreakable. Though her captor tried to strip her of control, she clung tightly to her sense of self, finding strength in the face of unimaginable hardship. The mental toll of captivity is devastating for any victim. The isolation, the helplessness, the feeling of being trapped, it can wear down even the strongest mind. Day after day, Jane faced this crushing weight, navigating the constant dread and the unknown. Each day brought new tests, each one silently demanding her resolve to withstand the circumstances she'd been forced into. Yet, beneath the fear, something powerful stirred, a survival instinct that drove her forward. Jane learned to read her surroundings, to understand her captor's routines and rhythms. She cultivated patience, a readiness for the right moment, and a focus that kept her grounded. When despair threatened to consume her, she pushed it aside, holding on to any flicker of hope, refusing to let her spirit be broken. In that relentless determination, Jane became her own source of courage. She endured, waiting for a chance to act, for a sliver of opportunity. Her mind, though burdened, became her strongest ally in captivity, guiding her through the darkness and keeping her grounded. And it was this strength, this remarkable, unyielding will to survive that became her lifeline, the force that carried her toward a freedom she refused to believe was out of reach. As investigators pieced together the story of Jane's disappearance, a deeply unsettling truth began to emerge. In time, they uncovered that her captor had meticulously planned every detail, seeing Jane not as a person, but as a possession, his prize. It was a revelation that sent a chill through everyone involved, illuminating the disturbing mindset of a man who had gone to unimaginable lengths to claim her. The plan had begun long before that fateful night. Her captor, lurking in plain sight, had fixated on Jane, obsessing over a twisted fantasy in which he would take her away and hold her captive, hidden from the world. This was not a spur of the moment crime. It was a carefully orchestrated scheme, revealing a mind driven by control and obsession. Every move he made had been calculated to ensure no one would find her, not her family, her friends, nor the police. But even more disturbing was his view of Jane herself. To him, she was not a person with her own dreams and fears, but rather an object to be controlled. Law enforcement would later describe this twisted perspective as one of the most chilling aspects of the case, a glimpse into the warped mind of a captor who saw Jane as something to possess, not as a young girl whose life he had upended. This sickening insight into his plans left the community reeling. It painted a portrait of a man capable of indescribable cruelty, someone who had plotted with methodical precision to steal a young girl's freedom. And while this revelation answered many questions, it also ignited a rage and urgency. Within the investigators, they knew they weren't dealing with a simple kidnapping. They were dealing with a calculated predator who had taken Jane in pursuit of a dark fantasy, a reality that would make her eventual escape all the more incredible. It was an icy January night, and Jane knew this could be her only chance. After months of captivity, of waiting and watching, she had begun to understand her captor's routine, his moments of distraction, and the fleeting windows where he let his guard down. On this night, she sensed something different, a chance, slim but possible, to make a break for freedom. With her heart pounding, Jane took her first steps. She crept past the closed door, her eyes trained on every shadow, ears straining for any sign that he was nearby. The silence was thick, each breath echoing in her ears as she moved forward, desperate but careful, knowing that one misstep could be the difference between escape and an even deeper nightmare. As she reached the outer door, fear gripped her, a fear that gnawed at her resolve, whispering doubts, but she forced them aside. She was beyond fear now. Survival was her only instinct. Stepping out into the cold, Jane felt the weight of freedom pressing down on her. Her bare feet hit the icy ground, each step both agonizing and exhilarating. She didn't look back, didn't dare, as she broke into a run, driven by the thought of finally escaping the horror she'd endured. Her breaths came sharp and fast, clouds of mist forming in the cold air, but nothing could slow her down. Every step took her further from her captor, further from the prison that had held her for so long. In the darkness, she stumbled upon a figure, a woman walking her dog. The woman's eyes widened as Jane, breathless and trembling, reached out, uttering the words she had been holding back for so long. I'm Jane Kloss. Those three words would be enough to shatter the silence surrounding her disappearance and bring an end to the nightmare. In that moment, the horror of captivity finally loosened its grip. Jane's journey was far from over, but on that frozen night, she took the first step toward reclaiming her life. The fear that had shadowed her every day was behind her, replaced by the strength that had carried her through the darkest of days, now leading her to the freedom she had fought so hard to grasp. As Jane bolted through the darkness, her breaths ragged and her heart pounding like a drum, she saw lights ahead. Trembling from cold and fear, she moved closer, hoping against hope that anyone would help. The world around her felt surreal, like a dream, yet every step reminded her this was real. She was outside, free, and each second brought her closer to safety. In the distance, a woman was walking her dog. The woman stopped, staring in shock as James, barefoot and disheveled, approached her with a look of desperate resolve. For a heartbeat, they simply stared at each other, the woman frozen in disbelief. Then James spoke, her voice thin but strong. "I'm James Kloss." The woman's face registered a series of emotions: disbelief, recognition, then overwhelming concern. As the shock melted into action, she ushered James inside, her hands shaking as she called for help. Jane could barely register what was happening, her mind racing from the adrenaline and the months of terror that had led her here. She had fought so hard for this moment, and now, finally, someone believed her. Someone was listening. As the emergency responders arrived, the weight of what she had endured began to ease, bit by bit. Surrounded by people who promised her safety, she could feel the darkness loosening its grip. This stranger, this one woman who'd been in the right place at the right time, had become her first ray of hope in what felt like an eternity. Jane was safe, and her nightmare was finally over. News of Jane Kloss's escape spread like wildfire, sending shockwaves across the nation and beyond. The unimaginable story of a young girl kidnapped, held captive, and then escaping through sheer willpower captured hearts everywhere. For months, people had followed her story with hope, dread, and unanswered questions. Now, the world watched in awe as James' resilience and bravery came to light. In homes, offices, and schools, people talked about James' incredible courage. Social media was flooded with messages of support, admiration, and relief. She had become a symbol of unyielding strength, an embodiment of hope in the face of darkness. Her name was on the front page of every paper, and her face appeared on screens across the globe. News anchors recounted her story with a mix of astonishment and admiration, marveling at the determination that had carried her through months of captivity. Survivors and advocates reached out, sharing their own stories of resilience, seeing in Jane a reminder of the human spirit's power to endure. Her escape was more than just a moment of freedom, it was a triumph over the horrors she had endured, a victory for every person who had prayed for her safe return. The world rallied around her, offering comfort, support, and an unbreakable bond that united everyone who had held out hope for her. In the midst of the global reaction, one thing became clear: Jane Kloss was no longer just a missing girl. She was a hero, a beacon of strength, a survivor who had stared down unimaginable terror and emerged unbroken to reclaim her life. And for those who watched her story unfold, her survival would be remembered as a powerful testament to human resilience and hope. With Jane safe and her nightmare over, law enforcement moved quickly to piece together the details of her abduction. For months, they had chased every lead, but now, with James' account, the puzzle finally began to fit together. Her captor was no longer a shadow lurking in the background. He had a name, a face, and a location. And as investigators traced his steps, a disturbing picture of his actions and motives emerged. James' captor had been a local, someone who blended into the quiet landscape of Wisconsin. He'd lived only a few towns away, yet he'd managed to evade all suspicion for months. The depths of his planning, his cold and calculated decision to target James, shocked even the most seasoned detectives. It was now clear that this had been no impulsive act. He had meticulously prepared, waiting for the right moment to strike, and had managed to keep her hidden all this time, just miles from the home he'd shattered. With James' brave testimony and newfound evidence, officers wasted no time tracking him down and taking him into custody. Each revelation, each new detail of his plot, only heightened the collective sense of horror and relief that justice would finally be served. The moment he was placed in handcuffs, a wave of relief swept through Barron. The terror that had hung over the town like a storm cloud began to lift, replaced by a renewed sense of safety and closure. As the news spread, there was a collective sigh of relief nationwide. James' captor would be brought to justice, and she would be free to heal, her bravery and strength honored by all who had followed her journey. For law enforcement, for her community, and for everyone who had rooted for her survival, this moment marked a powerful victory, a reckoning for the darkness that had sought to claim her. The day had come for James' captor to face justice, and the tension in the courtroom was palpable. Jane herself did not attend the trial, but her spirit was there in every word, every piece of evidence, and every witness who spoke on her behalf. Her captor sat stoically, the weight of his actions finally laid bare before the world. It was a solemn, powerful moment, a reckoning long overdue. The prosecutor detailed the chilling events of that October night, the brutality of the crime, and the calculated way he had held James captive. Each statement was a reminder of the horrors James had endured, yet also a testament to her courage and survival. As the judge delivered the final sentence, the courtroom felt a profound sense of closure. Justice had been served, and James' captor would face a life spent behind bars, with no chance of harming her or anyone else again. For everyone who had held their breath, waiting for this moment, it was a victory for James and a declaration that her resilience had triumphed over his darkness. With the trial behind her, Jane could finally begin the most important journey of all her path to healing. Though free from captivity, she faced a new struggle, one that required just as much bravery and strength. The trauma she carried was heavy, memories from those dark months etched deeply into her mind, surfacing in dreams and quiet moments. Yet Jane remained resolute, determined to reclaim her life, to find joy again. Surrounded by the love of her family, friends, and community, Jane took each day step by step. Therapy, support groups, and moments of simple peace began to stitch together the pieces of her life, allowing her to rediscover laughter and hope. Her resilience was as fierce as ever, guiding her as she rebuilt herself, learning to find strength in her own story. Her healing journey was and still is an act of courage, a testament to her unbreakable will to rise above the darkness. James' case became more than just a story of survival. It was a wake up call, a reminder of the silent threats that can exist even in small, safe towns. Her journey raised awareness about kidnapping, the importance of vigilance, and the enduring power of community. It showed the world that even the most unimaginable circumstances can be faced with courage and resilience. For those following her story, Jane became a symbol of strength, and her experiences led to more conversations around protecting vulnerable communities and the psychological impact of trauma. Her resilience reminded everyone of the strength that can emerge in the most unlikely of places, inspiring people to support survivors and to educate themselves on how to better recognize and respond to signs of danger. James' story served as both a warning and an inspiration, a lasting legacy of survival against all odds. James Kloss's journey leaves us with a powerful message. Even in the face of horror, hope endures. Her strength and determination touched millions, a reminder that resilience can grow even in the darkest of places. Barron, once a town marked by tragedy, became a symbol of community support, of neighbors who rallied, searched, and never gave up hope for one of their own. Together, they forged a bond with Jane that would remain unbroken, a testament to the power of unity in times of despair. As Jane continues her life, her story stands as a beacon of survival. She reminds us all that no matter how deep the darkness, there is always light waiting to be reclaimed. Her journey is far from over, and her courage will inspire countless others facing hardship to keep moving forward, to hold on to hope, and to believe in their own strength. And for those who watched her story unfold, Jane Kloss will forever be a hero, a symbol of hope, resilience, and the enduring spirit of survival.